more mature cyber organizations do reap the rewards by embedding that cybersecurity and security by design earlier in their program life cycles in terms of both positive impacts on their brand, their digital trust programs, and ultimately their operational capabilities to deliver those programs.
So Nicola, I just wanted to understand what are the key themes and trends you're seeing in the world of data privacy, specifically in the financial sector?
Well, I think it's predominantly about the data ecosystem and how organizations are collecting, using, and ultimately retaining personal data. A successful data ecosystem thrives on the fact that, both the organization and the customer understands what's happening to their data, that the organization understands the customer's challenges and needs in relation to the product or their data and how their data is used. It's been 5 years since GDPR, and in that time, there's still a core focus on compliance in terms of purely complying with the requirements. But what we are seeing is a very welcome move in terms of the second line of defense. So second line of defense traditionally are the people who are monitoring and assuring in terms of privacy compliance. And that shift is moving more towards the first line in terms of driving a more operationally effective privacy program. Particularly now when the development of tech is so at the top of mind. We're seeing a lot around artificial intelligence, ChatGPT. If we even think about how propensity modeling is happening within the financial services, if we also think about, gamifying customer engagement strategies, what we're seeing there is ultimately more of a focus on a really rich personal data set. But with that, it brings ultimately bigger risk for the organization in terms of, protecting people's personal data and protecting their rights in relation to privacy.
Wow, that's actually quite a few things which probably would have changed from the transition to the new world of AI and I suppose privacy by design, and which probably gets me to the second question, which I wanted to sort of understand. What are the successful measures or strategic thinking that data privacy teams for clients which you find successful in terms of implementing the core strategy around data protection across these different challenges that organizations are facing, specifically again in the financial space?
So we at Deloitte, what we're seeing is, number one, we're seeing that redesign of compliance shifting from the second line into first line. But number two, and this is where it becomes really interesting for our capabilities and skill sets, is we're seeing a real focus on the privacy by design, embedding privacy into everyday operations, embedding privacy into the product development lifecycle, the software development lifecycle, any type of processing in relation to personal data. With that comes the bonus that if you're embedding it from the beginning, you're ultimately complying straight away. It's a proactive approach as opposed to reactive. And we're seeing more and more organizations kind of understanding that. And then particularly now that there's a new privacy by design ISO standard, right, which has just been announced. So there's going to be quite an emphasis on that. On top of that, we're seeing a lot more roles opening up in terms of privacy engineering. So you have a software developer who is privacy engineer minded, and they're sitting within the teams and is there for the entire sprint, implementing and ensuring privacy requirements are in there. And because of that, we're seeing that our clients and organizations becoming laser focused on, ensuring that privacy becomes part of their brand enhancer. And with that, then it reassures the customers and the clients and the consumers in terms of their products. But I think it probably goes beyond privacy by design a little bit. And Noel, I'm sure you're seeing it as well. Is there an emphasis on security by design that's kind of tagging onto that?
Yeah, no, I think we've always long recognised in cyber that having that sort of security by design built in earlier in project life cycles does reward benefits. I think what we've seen in the last 5 years is the uplift from privacy programs, because privacy by design is much more legislative driven over the last 5 years. So I think cyber teams are now getting the benefit of that because they're being asked to consult earlier on the first line of defence, and that sort of technical control and technical and organisational measures to enable privacy by design. So I think we're seeing that collaboration as a key factor to drive security by design as well. I think also we know from sort of the last few years that operational resilience is a much more key for organisations. They understand cyber risks and cyber threats at a much more fundamental level than we probably did ever in our past, in the last 20 years. I think one of the real advantages of that is what we're seeing in the market now is a willingness to embrace cyber early on. And we can see from our recent surveys clearly demonstrate that more mature cyber organizations do reap the rewards by embedding that cybersecurity and security by design earlier in their program life cycles in terms of both positive impacts on their brand, their digital trust programs, and ultimately their operational capabilities to deliver those programs.
No, interestingly, you mentioned about a lot of changes there, and if you look at the past 18 months, as the dust settles on around the world we've had a pandemic, we've had digital transformations. So, how do you see the threat landscape, which has evolved over the last 18 months, and can you speak from the point of view of threats, from a threat actor point of view as well, and also how the financial institutions are dealing with that threat landscape?
I mean, yes, I think when we look at the threat landscape, especially even over the last 12 to 18 months, it's clear we can see the rise of much more competent and capable threat actor groups and advanced persistent threats. I think the financial sector is a key component of our everyday life, and as such, it's very much in the sightline for threat actors to target. So they're not. There is not one single threat actor type that's looking at the financial service industry. You see a lot of activity both from the nation state level, crime syndicates, and malicious insiders to try and leverage that. I think the old adage, why do people rob banks? And it's because that's where the money is. I think still holds true, and even with the new values banks have, bank networks are being attacked all the time. Information is very valuable. If people can discover information with their customers, they can then maybe mount a fraudulent campaign against the consumers. We see continued attacks against the consumers in the market, to try and exfiltrate money from their bank accounts through phishing websites and sort of fraudulent messages, fraudulent text messages. So it's a very lucrative business. And I think the geopolitical situation we've seen in the last 18 months with the war in Ukraine especially, we're seeing much more capable threat actors because cyber is now part of the nation state warfare lexicon. So it is a battle technique and a battle product. So I think that is just creating more capabilities within the market. And we know nation states are not averse to using mercenaries, and the same is true for cyber mercenaries as well. So that capability is out there. And the unfortunate thing is once an attack vector is being used by a nation state level, it quickly filters out into the criminal syndicates and the less capable attackers, and they can reuse that capability moving forward. And what we are seeing, because banks are going through a transformative phase at the moment, embracing more digital services and all the rest of it. Right. So in addition to the security by design approach, we're also seeing a renewed interest in zero trust frameworks and looking at that because they can then move away from traditional perimeter defensive models, the old castle walls and the moat, to a much more distributed security model by putting controls and authentication mechanisms closer to the data they're trying to protect and closer to the consumers that are trying to interact with those data. So that's where we're kind of seeing the key sort of macro trends at the moment. And cyber is one of those macro trends in the cyber or in the financial services industry that they are embracing and they need to continue to embrace to move forward continue to move forward with their market offerings.
What about you, Wayaf? I'd be really interested to hear about maybe one or two client success stories from the past few years, just that, you know, what you're seeing, the various trends are, and how we've helped and supported our clients to kind of wade through all these challenges.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about the threat landscape, and just to sort of compound the problem, there's a lot of pressure, around the financial institutions from a regulatory standpoint. So we see the new regulations on DORA, we have EU Resilience Act. So the core focus for financial institutions are moving from, as you said, from proactive to from reactive to proactive, and I think that's the state where these different frameworks are also sort of coming in. Now, in terms of the success stories, I would say if the strategy is kept a little bit flexible, it's not static. If the threats are modeled for your own enterprises, and then after you model your own threats, it's really important to test your defense in depth, your controls around zero trust. I think that's what's working well for organizations who are close to their own threat landscape, who are learning in practice but not in theory. And I suppose that's where we see the most success which comes from, because I think the talent shortage around the world of cybersecurity is actually going to accentuate the problem. So it's pretty much leads to how the strategy is optimized to deliver the maximum results from a security standpoint. And I think that's where we get a lot of requests in terms of we want to achieve 5 months of work in sort of 5 days, but then sometimes you have to actually be realistic in terms of how we can achieve in that specific amount of time.
It is kind of being about strategic and building, always building upon the next.
Absolutely, yeah. I think you need to sort of take a constant view around the threat. I suppose, because as Noel mentioned, the threat landscape keeps on changing. It keeps on evolving. What we were looking at the threat actors, it's completely changed. The threat market space, in terms of, it's almost like an illegal market space, right? You're selling your goods, your products and services. So just to give you an example, we had a Deloitte did actually a threat survey back in September, and there was a trend that malware as a service is one of those services which are utilized by threat actors, because, well, the threat actors is just like human beings, right? They're lazy, but they're smart. They want to take the shortcuts, the routes to avail these services. They want to buy malware kits, and they want to find the easy way out to attack financial institutions. So 1 in 5 cyber criminals or cyber underground threat actors are actually targeting the financial industry. So therefore, as I said, we need to constantly test our defenses. We have to make sure our strategy is taking all the controls around the specific threats that we would have modeled.
Yeah, and those threats kind of, that almost enhances the personal data risk. Because if you think about what I was saying about the propensity modeling and the gamification of customer enhancement strategies, I mean, you're building your data there day on day, month on month, year on year. And the more data you have, the riskier it really is. So like the importance of kind of securing against that is just massive.
Yeah, I mean, we can see challenge in that, because the more data you have and the more systems you have, the more complex your environment becomes, coupled with a scarcity of skilled resources in the cyber and privacy space, can make that risk a little bit more sort of realistic and more likely to be exposed. But I think what we're also seeing, is I know, like, when we talk about the Digital Operations Resilience Act, or DORA as it's commonly known, has been another compliance burden on financial institutions. But we also see, the way the Act is written and the type of activities it's trying to bring together from disparate acts across it is an enhancement to helping organizations move themselves forward. And it could be a game changer, because it will give maybe sort of burdened cyber teams or technical teams a little bit more sort of legislative support to invest in these programs and build that operation resilience capability into the organization. So we're hoping that this will help elevate cyber across Europe and actually put us as a leading practitioner in the world for this type of activity.
And something, in the way of you might have something to kind of add to this, but something I'm definitely seeing is that we are more and more being called upon from a strategic perspective. in terms of not just the pure core comply with regulation, understand where our threats are, all of that, but more, future focused. Like, what is the future of data privacy for the financial services? What is the future of cyber for the financial services? Financial institutions want to do more. They're bringing in new technologies, new ways of automating data and understanding, automated decision making even. And with that, I certainly see that we're becoming more of a partner with our clients in this space, that we can kind of help them to see, yes, the regulation says you can't do this and this is a particular requirement and you have to comply, but have you thought about complying in this way, that it actually enhances your brand and opens up that opportunity for your customers? Is there a similar thinking in terms of the purely cyber threat landscape in relation to that?
Yes, certainly. So I think, you mentioned about the artificial intelligence piece, and I think what we're also seeing a lot of threat vectors coming through the extended third parties. So you spoke about the future. So even in the last 2 years, we've been dealing with a lot of financial institutions. They've actually increased the third party ecosystem, which brings additional risk. So in order to sort of monitor the risk which is coming from your software supply chains, there are applications being built very frequently. So just to sort of monitor that piece is becoming extremely important. You're as strong as your weakest link, right? So I think that's definitely going to be a problem to solve in the future, because dealing with the vast amount of third parties is actually a pressing issue, and we get a lot of requests in terms of how do we ensure that we are compliant to that, right, in terms of the third-party risk. And there are some certifications that third parties generally produce, but they may not be enough in the context of the data that they're processing. There could be card verification values that they must be processing in the financial industry. So it's really important to do thorough due diligence before we onboard.
Organizations need to embrace the third-party ecosystem to truly grow and realize their potential. So it's not that the third-party ecosystem is a risk by and of itself. I think it's more about sort of how do we manage our risk. The threat actors are constantly looking for that weakest link of the chain, and if they see a third-party supplier into a financial institution as that weak link, they'll go after them. They're patient, they're laser focused, they will outsource components. The bad guys don't do it all themselves. As Wei has mentioned, they have a really strong ecosystem of suppliers themselves, and they'll outsource elements to get that first initial footprint to leverage that. And they are patient. We saw even with the HSE attack last year, the bad guys were in there for weeks and months before they actually triggered the cyber attack. So I think managing that risk and putting the frameworks and the guardrails in place can really help organizations manage that risk and grow together with their third parties.